So in this first video about writing PGCE assignments, and they are kind of a unique breed of assignment, we're going to try and drill into some of the terminology and try and figure out actually what on earth are they asking us. And the first one of those things is this phrase, critically evaluate. What does that actually mean? This is an example portion of a PGCE assignment, which point of interest would not achieve level 7 or 6, come to that. There are going to be some errors as we go along. We'll have a quick look at what it actually is talking about, and then we'll have a look at this critically evaluate and try and sort of decode what that actually is, what it means, and what it's asking you. So, according to Corbyn Strong, many schools have found that daily storytelling can have a dramatic influence on progress in composition. Research that focused on 4 to 5-year-olds in reception classes found that at the start of the year, only 2% of the sample children were able to retell a whole story. However, through daily storytelling, by the end of the year, 76% could recount a whole tale in fluent English, unlike me apparently. The primary writing project states that T4W appears to be impacting school practices in a way that teachers find effective and pupils find appealing, although some aspects of the approach have not yet been validated through thorough investigation. Remember the why and the how and forget the what? Isn't how this should be read. This should be read, remember the why and how, and forget the what. And you'll notice, what does critically evaluate actually mean has become slightly more confrontational at the bottom, with the addition of a much needed exclamation mark. Alright, so what does critically evaluate actually mean, and what does remember the why and the how mean, and what does forget the what mean? Effectively what I've done here is I've actually asked more questions than I've answered. Alright, so let's have a look back through this brief passage and see if we can't pick out, first of all, a few basic errors, and then actually, is this critically evaluating? Hint, no it's not. Okay, so first and foremost, Corbyn Strong, that should have a date after it. It's a citation. You shouldn't just put the names of people in there, even if you previously referenced them in the preceding sentence. You should still have a reference of some description. Focus is spelled wrong, that's just a side issue, but it's bugging me. I wish I'd changed it now. T4W, that should be explained as what that stands for, even if only just the once. Let's remind ourselves of what critically evaluate actually means. It means why and it means how, and it doesn't mean what. So let's have a look back at what this section says. According to Corbyn Strong, many schools have found that daily storytelling can have a dramatic influence on progress in composition, which of course is a load of old what. Research that focused on 4 to 5-year-olds in reception classes found that at the start of the year only 2% of the sample children were able to retell a whole story. However, through daily storytelling by the end of the year, 76% could recount a whole tale in fluent English. A colossal pile of what? The primary writing project states that T4W appears to be impacting school practices in a way that teachers find effective and pupils find appealing, although some aspects of the approach have not yet been validated through thorough investigation, or as I like to think of it, an enormous pile of what. This paragraph doesn't actually do anything apart from storytell, effectively. All it's really doing is it's telling us some facts. It tells us what Corbyn and Strong have said, it gives us a statistic or two, it tells us something that the primary writing projects have stated, but there's no argument, there's no interrogation, it's just what. What? So, alright, what does critically evaluate mean? Well, the essay title that this is taken from is to critically evaluate talk for writing. That's what the T4W stands for, if you're not familiar already. Now, critically evaluating things might come in a couple of different forms. It might be to critically evaluate a particular thing, for example, talk for writing. It might be to critically evaluate the literature around a certain thing. There's not a massive amount of difference, really, because in order to critically evaluate talk for writing, you need to find out what other people have said about it. Yes, you could do talk for writing in your school, in your placement, and you could critically evaluate whether you think it's any good or not. But in order for that to be a kind of rounded evaluation, you need to start putting different opinions together. You need to start finding different critics who think different things, who make different arguments, who have different experiences, who use different samples, who went to different schools, who found different results, and compare them. You'll probably remember from when you're doing GCSEs and A-levels, that horrible compare and contrast thing. Find things that are the same, find things that are different. It's not really any different at level 7. It's just kind of harder. So, alright, so the whys and the hows. Remember, we're not bothering with whats. Whats are no use to us. An opening paragraph with a couple of whats in it might be acceptable just to set the scene, but really just try and avoid them. Every time you write something that's a what statement, you're just describing it. It's just description. Description is not master's level. You probably wouldn't even necessarily get away with it at undergraduate level, maybe more so, but certainly not at master's level. If you have too many whats in there, it'll just fall apart because you're not demonstrating that critical eye. And as a teacher and as a professional practitioner, you're constantly having to evaluate your practice, you're constantly having to evaluate new educational things that come in, like Talk for Writing, like Literacy Hour, if you remember that far back. Probably most of you aren't even born then. Look for the strengths and the weaknesses in these pieces of research. Often, if you find a study that you think is particularly relevant and you do a little bit more digging, you might very well find other studies that reference that study. So you might find other studies that reference Corbyn Strong, or whoever. They're just an example, could be anybody. And you might find other journal articles or other passages in books that actually start to pick holes in those studies and go, well, yeah, you know what, it's fine that they said this, this and this. However, let's not forget that their study was based in Russia, where the education system is quite different. Or their study was done in a public school or a private school somewhere where the entry requirements are that much higher or lower or whatever. What you're basically not doing is you aren't saying, this is what this person said, sounds plausible, brilliant, here's somebody else that agrees. What you are doing is you're being critical. So you're kind of just, literally that's what you're doing, you're evaluating it. You're saying, okay, well they said this, this and this, however this other author said completely the opposite. So let's have a quick look. This person's sample said it was really good. They had a sample of 3 children. These authors said this Talk for Writing was awful. They had a sample of 2,000 children. Which of those two is going to be the more reliable source, do you think? 3 kids or 500? Or whatever the numbers were that I said. I've already forgotten. That's middle age, folks. Always look for what's good about a piece of information and what's not so good. Another thing, if you have 2 conflicting opinions, one is an author that wrote their study in the 1970s, one is an author that wrote their study 5 years ago, there's an obvious issue right there. You know, the world is a different place, schools are a very different place, schools aren't the same week on week, much less after 3 decades. So if you're finding studies that are really kind of disparate in terms of the years that they were written in, there's a thing you could pick up on. If the only studies you can find that support a particular thing are 30 years old, there's an argument. You know, things have moved on since whenever this thing was written about whatever it is they're talking about. So strengths and weaknesses. Try and find things that are really, really good about your sources, but also try and find some holes in it. You know, as bad as it sounds, you kind of get on better if you pull things apart and criticise them, because you're kind of demonstrating skills. If you just find a study and go, this is really good, and I've spent 3 months pouring into it and I just can't find anything wrong with it, you know, as good as your critical evaluation skills might be in that process, you aren't demonstrating them by just saying it was really good. Similarly, don't just say it sucked, because that is the same. It's no better. Thinking about whys, if you find 2 studies where the results are quite different or the opinions are quite different, and you'll often find that in education because everybody in the world of education has got an opinion. If you find 2 studies that are quite different, why is that? You know, as I said, are the 2 studies from different time periods almost? Because, you know, even 5 years between 2 studies could be an influencing factor on the fact that the results are different or the conclusions are different. Look at the data. Do you agree with the conclusions that they've drawn from that data? Look at the explanations that the study offers. So if they present you with a load of information and this is the reason we thought it happened, you know, you could argue that. Don't ever underestimate the importance and the significance and the validity of your opinion. Forget the fact that you've only been teaching maybe a couple of weeks. Doesn't matter, you know. You're studying for a master's level postgraduate qualification. You're no slouch. You know, you've chosen teaching as your chosen profession. Obviously, otherwise you wouldn't have chosen it. That's how it became a chosen profession. Everyone, as I say, has got an opinion, and all those opinions are valid. So if you read a study and you don't agree with what it's saying, don't think for 1 second that that opinion is invalid because you're a trainee. It's not. And actually, good on you. You know, have the courage of your convictions and argue it. And also, why and how, don't necessarily just focus on other people's opinions. Don't just try and find what other people have said and argue the toss. Don't just say, look, Corbyn Strong tried talk for writing in a class of 4 kids and thought it was amazing. Hubert and William, I don't know, made those up, did a similar study in the Netherlands, and they did it in a school, a whole school. There were 2,000 kids, and they thought it was absolutely dreadful. And so, you know, obviously there's a bit of a difference of opinion here, blah, 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 blah. You know, not only does your opinion of what they've said matter, your opinion of actually that thing in itself matters. If you work in a school and you're using talk for writing, even if you're just observing classes, which is the perfect place, really, because you can be completely dispassionate, completely separate and removed from the teaching process, and observe something in its purest form actually happening in a classroom. If you're in that position, and you have an opinion of that particular thing, be it talk for writing or back in the day, back when I was looking at it, the literacy hour, which was very new back then, the glory days. Everyone hated it. I thought it was good, but everyone hated it. You know, if you're in a position that you can see it happening and you have an opinion of it and you don't think it's any good, or you think it's amazing, you know, that's perfectly valid. Don't just say, I thought it was really good, or I thought it was dreadful. But, you know, obviously you have to argue your case. Why do you think it was so good? Did you see the kids being more motivated? Were the kids achieving better? Were the kids contributing more in lessons? Was their retention better? Whatever it might be, you have an opinion, and that opinion counts. And as much as you have to demonstrate this ability to take criticism, or make criticism, if you like, of existing literature and finding articles and books and stuff and pulling together arguments and tearing them apart and contrasting them and comparing them and all that, you yourself have an opinion of something. And it is just as important in an essay like this to present your opinion, present your arguments. This is what Corbyn Strong said. Corbyn Strong said, talk for writing, absolutely amazing, loved it, massive influence on progress in composition. However, I've been using it in my placement school for the last 3 weeks. I haven't seen any influence on progress. What I have seen is a massive amount of time in the lessons where the kids are just sort of sitting around idle for whatever reason, or the kids aren't motivated, or the kids aren't engaged in it, you know, whatever it might be. If that's your opinion, then argue your opinion, because that is critically evaluating. You're saying, you know, I've seen this in practice and I haven't cared for it, honestly. There is, however, one what that you should keep in your mind and exercise at all times. I do apologise for the background noise. It would appear that a couple of the neighbours' kids are fighting to the death, or so it sounds. There is one what that's important. The so what. It's so cheesy. More exactly, so what? Every time you make an argument, every time you make a statement, every time you provide a statistic, every time you do anything, really, in your essay, ask yourself, so what? If what you're writing doesn't make a contribution to what you're trying to argue, don't put it in. Get rid of it. Every single sentence counts. Most assignments you're going to be writing at master's level are around 3,000 words. I know some universities do slightly longer ones, or they join 2 together and one of them's like 6. Broadly speaking, 3,000. Allowing 500 words or so at the start to kind of introduce what it is you're going to be talking about. Allowing 500 words or so at the end to kind of pull it all together and make a sort of final conclusion, some recommendations for your own practice or whatever it might be. But really 2,000 words then of pure argument. You can't afford to waste any of those words. Every word counts. Every time you add something, every time you find a quote in a book that you think you're going to use, and I will do another video at some point about quotes, because basically don't use them. But every time you find an argument to present or whatever you're going to be doing, ask yourself, so what? So what? Does this answer the question? Does this address the question? Does this make an important point? If it doesn't, If it doesn't make a strong contribution to your essay, get rid of it. You don't have the time or the space to worry about it. I am actually fairly sure that they are trying to kill each other. I should probably go and check. Anyway, I hope that's been of some use. There's so much to talk about in terms of masters assignments. I dare say this is the first of several videos like this, but I mentioned it because somebody in the group spoke specifically about critical evaluation, so I thought I will attempt to offer my 10 pence worth of thoughts. Why is Rosie sort of fallen down in the background over there? Should have checked that before I started. Anyway, if there are specific things that trouble you about the prospect of writing masters assignments, if you've had your essay titles through and you don't understand what they're asking you, really someone should be helping you on your course. However, if there are questions you want to ask or things you think I can maybe do a video about, please do comment either on the video or on the Facebook group, or message me or email me or whatever, and I will try and cover them. There's a lot to get through. There's lots of things I've got in mind. Like I mentioned before about quotes, just don't use them. But the reason for that and how to get around it, I will cover in a video. That's more around the writing process than it is about the researching, arguing part. It's just the actual getting it down bit. So yeah, anything that you think I could talk about that might be helpful, please do ask, and I will do that. Whatever helps you. Okay, cheers, bye.